Hello, everybody, and welcome to Economic Health Means Business, the Fort Collins Story, hosted by the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse. The Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse is a project of the Smart Growth Network, which is funded by the US EPA Office of Sustainable Communities and managed by the Maryland Department of Planning. SmartGrowth.org is your one-stop on the web for the most current information on effective growth, development, and preservation practices. We provide timely news and information about events, funding opportunities, awards, and financial resources. My name is Kristen Mitchell, and I'm your host for today. I'm the Manager of Infrastructure and Development at the Maryland Department of Planning, and I manage the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse. Today we present the Economic Health Means Business, the Fort Collins Story. Fort Collins, Colorado is at the forefront of an exciting paradigm shift in economic development. In fact, I shouldn't even be using the term economic development. This city of 160,000 residents in north central Colorado intentionally uses the term economic health instead of economic development to better reflect its objective of long-term community vitality. Fort Collins explicitly intends its economic strategies to reinforce other community goals, such as fostering a distinctive and attractive community image and supporting beloved assets, such as its bicycle infrastructure. Elements of Fort Collins' approach include building on strengths, such as the majestic Rocky Mountain scenery and renowned breweries, fostering entrepreneurship and innovation to encourage business growth from within the community, and supporting investments that reinforce the qualities that attract so many people to the city in the first place. Today, we will hear from two people who have been instrumental in fostering and implementing Fort Collins' approach, Josh Burks and Jeff Mihalik. Josh Burks is Fort Collins' Economic Health Director. Before joining the city, he worked as a senior associate for Economic and Planning Systems, a real estate consulting firm. He led numerous projects, including redevelopment of the former Gates rubber plant in Denver, the core-to-shore market strategy in Oklahoma City, the Children's Hospital reuse in Denver, the Buckley Annex redevelopment in Denver, and the Mason Corridor bus rapid transit economic impact analysis in Fort Collins. Josh is an expert in economic development, real estate finance, market analysis, and cluster development. He attended the University of Denver and graduate school in urban and regional planning at Portland State University. Jeff Mihalik is the Deputy City Manager and Chief Operating Officer for Fort Collins. Jeff holds a Master of Science degree in urban and regional planning from Portland State University and has more than 25 years of experience in city and county government operations. Mr. Mihalik is responsible for day-to-day operations of the city's municipal services and staff as he works with the city's executive leadership team to implement the organization's strategic plan. He also serves as a key member of the Climate Action Plan executive team, which is the bedrock of the city's implementation infrastructure to achieve the community's climate change goals of carbon neutrality by 2050. Following our panelists' presentations, they will answer as many questions as we have time for during a Q&A period. You can ask a question at any time using the questions tool in the control panel, which is located on the right side of your screen. Now I will turn it over to Josh and Jeff, who will discuss how Fort Collins is working to achieve economic health for the city.
Thanks very much, Kristen. We're really excited to be here this morning and this afternoon, depending on where you are in the country, to share our story. We think it is a unique story, but what I want to stress is that as we're telling you the story here in Fort Collins, I would encourage you to think about how you're going about economic development and think about some of the successes that we've had in Fort Collins, and perhaps some of the initiatives and approaches that we're using might be applicable in your community as well. So just again, a little bit of background about the city of Fort Collins. We are a full-service city of 160,000 people. We're located 1 hour north of Denver. We are not considered part of the Denver metropolitan area, and actually we're very proud of that independence. and we are up against the Front Range. We are also the home of Colorado State University, and they're an important part of our identity, and we have a number of partnerships with Colorado State, which Josh will talk about in more detail in a few minutes. So as you think about Fort Collins, we are very well known for bikes, bands, beauty, and beer. Bikes because we're one of the few platinum level bicycle communities in the United States. Bands because there's just about every single weekend a music festival where people will enjoy. And beauty because our backdrop is the Rocky Mountains, and we also have the Cache La Poudre River running through the heart of our downtown, a blue ribbon trout stream. And I can tell you, I can walk out of my house, walk down the street, and catch a brown trout, which is really kind of cool. And we're the home of a lot of wonderful breweries, including Odell and New Belgium. So we've been known to have a few fat tire now and then. So with that, if you haven't been to Fort Collins, please come, enjoy. We think you'll have a good time here. And because of all that beauty, 95% of our residents, according to Time Magazine, have deemed us to be the most satisfied city in the United States. And because of that, we have really geared our economic development programs into what we call economic health. Our residents are very protective of the city of Fort Collins. They like it the way it is, and while they do embrace appropriate growth, they don't do economic development and encourage economic development. They want economic growth to happen in a very positive way that only enhances the quality of life in the city of Fort Collins. Our residents really want it to be a place where they can find employment and afford to live here, a place where businesses are able to encourage to start, remain, and expand, and a place where everyone can expect quality city services and sustainable, attractive infrastructure. So what I think is most unique about our economic health approach is it's not about jobs and it's not about revenue. And I know a lot of communities approach it that way. And I also understand that there's some political pressure to respond and develop initiatives for economic development in that vein. But for us, it's really about taking care of what we have and enhancing it and moving forward, and especially taking care of our existing businesses. So if you look at this photo, it really shows our beautiful downtown Fort Collins, and you'll see a business that's highlighted there along the street is called The Cupboard. The Cupboard is a business that has been successful in the city of Fort Collins in their existing location since 1972. So when we develop new, exciting economic health initiatives, it's really about bringing new business, but more importantly, about protecting and enhancing the environment for existing businesses like The Cupboard. So now let me back up a little bit and give you some information about our transformation. I think it all started for us back in 1870 when Colorado Agricultural College was founded. That ultimately became Colorado State University. We also were very fortunate to control a lot of our own destiny with acquiring a lot of water rights in the United States. For those of you on the phone from Western United States, you can understand how important water is. People around here call it liquid gold, and if you don't have control of your water resources, then you're going to not be able to control your growth. And we established that way back in 1876. Another advantage for us is that we own our own municipal electric utility. We're really not at the mercy of either a state or a large regional electric utility. We kind of control our own destiny in that way as well. So that, from a very early age, allowed us to really move forward in a positive direction, whether it was education, water, or utilities. So that helped us a tremendous amount. And then you can see the businesses that came in under different waves. In 1977, Hewlett-Packard opened their doors in Fort Collins, which really started kind of our high-tech boom. In 1991, New Belgium Brewery started the wave of microbreweries in the United States and specifically in northern Colorado and Fort Collins. In 1998, OtterBox came to the city of Fort Collins and really established the really drive about people using their personal communication devices. So we're very happy. OtterBox, by the way, started in a garage in the city of Fort Collins and have grown now to a Fortune 500 company. And then more recently, Woodward Governor, who was here starting in 2007, expanded very broadly in 2015 to relocate their international headquarters and manufacturing facility to Fort Collins in 2015. So again, That's kind of gives you some historical landmarks of how we've transformed over the years. Another important part of our economic health strategy, and actually about how we govern the whole city in general, is our triple bottom line approach. We're one of the few cities in the United States that actually has a sustainability services department or service area. And the reason I call it service area is because it's actually 3 separate departments, which is social health, environmental health, and economic health, all within one service area called sustainability services. That is our triple bottom line approach. I'm sure many of you have heard of a 3-legged stool approach of social, environmental, and economic, but I think our unique approach is that it's not about trade-offs in Fort Collins. We treat all of those areas equally, and we try to make sure it's about optimization and not trade-offs. And that's been very successful for us as well. It's also important to note that we truly embrace innovation. In fact, we're one of the few communities in the United States that have been highlighted at the Smithsonian Institute as being a place of innovation. We received that title or designation based on our triple helix focus, which Josh will talk about in a few minutes, about our prioritization and industry clusters, where we're very focused in our economic health initiatives. It's not a scattershot approach, about using existing talent within the community for our economic health initiatives, and making sure that we use the city as a platform, whether that's infrastructure, water, or partnerships, to move that forward. So again, when you think about Fort Collins and what we're doing, think about triple helix, clusters, leveraging existing talent within the city, and the city as a platform. And here's our really quick first story. So there's many different ways that communities all across the country can invest, right? Especially when it comes to either economic development or economic health. I think there's a lot of communities, and I've worked for some, that truly believe that investment in economic development is about investing in what I call coupons or incentives or buy downs or anything they can do from a monetary standpoint to recruit and expand existing businesses. While we do some of that here in the city of Fort Collins, we don't do it very often. Where we really invest more than anything else actually is the acquisition of land, partnering with our university, making sure that we have some of the best water and water rates in the city, to make sure that we provide inexpensive, affordable power in our community, and then more importantly, and I can't stress this enough, making sure that we provide an outstanding quality of life, whether that's partnering with our local school district, community college, or university, or investing heavily in trails, the acquisition of open space, and providing recreational amenities. I can tell you that while I wasn't here, I've heard this from a number of people here in Fort Collins, that when Hewlett-Packard decided to relocate way back in 1977 to the city of Fort Collins, it wasn't about the coupon, you guys. It wasn't about a big check that the city of Fort Collins wrote to them to provide an incentive to come. HP executives decided to relocate to the city of Fort Collins and to expand because of the Rocky Mountains, because of the trails, because of the open space, because of the river, and because of the outstanding school system. So we are very protective of that identity, and we invest heavily in all those quality of life factors. Again, we do some incentive packages, but never as a way to initially entice a business. It's more about making sure that we have a high quality of life in our community. Now I'm going to turn it over to Josh, who's going to dial it in really closely and tell you about our industry cluster approach.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I want to take this opportunity now, after Jeff has kind of laid out some of the key principles for how the city of Fort Collins thinks about economic health, and now kind of talk about how does this turn into action and show up actually through the work of my office, the Economic Health Office. One of the key ways that we create intentionality and focus to our activities is through our effort of identifying and trying to grow and develop industry clusters. Jeff and I like to tell this story about, or a little story about the similarity between duck hunters and economic developers. If any of you know Jeff out there, you might have heard this story once before. I'm going to borrow it from him today. The similarity between duck hunters and economic developers is they tend to shoot at whatever flies, and then they claim whatever falls. And I think that that is indicative of what is really an outmoded way of operating in the industry. And I can actually give a lot of credit to my colleagues within the economic development field, that the field as an entirety is really moving away from a heavy focus on short-term gain and towards trying to understand larger and more impactful issues like inequality within communities and how you can make changes there. So again, our cluster approach is really, again, about being intentional and recognizing the strengths of our own community. And we try to do this in a very inclusive way through what we call the triple helix. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that in just a few minutes. But it's about bringing different portions of the community together to achieve some common objectives that benefit not only business communities, but also the community itself. So we, back in 2006, shortly after the Economic Health Office was created, started with a study of what are the strengths within our community. At that time, the study identified 6 key industries. They were agricultural technology, computer and electronics, information technology, bioscience, clean energy, and uniquely Fort Collins. Move forward a few years to 2010, and City Council actually adopted 5 industry clusters to be intentional about where economic health and economic growth should try to occur. These 5 industries include clean energy, water innovation, bioscience, technology, and uniquely Fort Collins. Several of these are self-explanatory. Bioscience, I think we're all fairly familiar with, and it has been a hot industry in a lot of communities for quite some time. Technology for us here in Fort Collins really focuses on enterprise software and some unique hardware. We have a large microchip manufacturer here in town in Avago, and we have design centers for several of the major chip manufacturers in the world, HP, Intel, and AMD, all located here in our community. One of the things that I think is very unique and indicative of our approach to economic development, or this economic health concept we've been talking about today, is that we chose as 2 of our key industries to focus on clean energy and water innovation. And this demonstrates one of the key aspects in my mind of economic health, which is aligning your desired economic, or your hope for economic growth, with your sort of desired future state for your community and your community's values. And that we'll talk a little bit more about later when I talk about the climate economy, which is sort of a new space we're moving into. But both water, as we've talked about already, as Jeff said, it's liquid gold here in the West. It's important for the success of any community, as well as energy, are going to play a very significant role in the way cities continue to evolve and mature in the next 50 years. And so we're trying to be intentional about having our industry play in that space and help to evolve not only our community, but others as well, to help achieve better and more responsible outcomes in the future. So I think the takeaway for other communities is the focus on industries in Fort Collins is really a focus on what are our community strengths. And I would recommend that if you want to move towards a future of economic health, each community should be spending its own time trying to understand its own strengths and aligning those strengths with its community's values. You know, if it's tourism, if it's advanced manufacturing, high-tech or heavy industry that you have strengths in your community, how do you align those with where your community is headed and your community's values? And I think I'll talk a little bit more about that when I give you some more detail here on the triple helix. So the triple helix is really about a way of trying to go about creating economic growth in your community. It's trying to take the strengths of 3 key entities, research entities, private sector, and public sector, and using those strengths to offset the weaknesses of each. The private sector, which is made up of employers and businesses, have capital, they have understanding of markets, they have appreciations of the challenges in the community. Research entities have capability to understand complex issues, They tend to be populated with young and talented workforce, and they have an understanding of broader systems so they can fit challenges that the market's identifying into the broader system. You know, the public sector, as we've talked about before, can become a platform to test new ideas. It's also a source of real-world challenges that need to be addressed. One of the unique aspects of Fort Collins being a full-service city that includes both electricity and water is we have the ability to talk about utility challenges that are not only faced by other full-service communities and public sector entities, but also private sector companies that are providing either electric, gas, or water utility. And then the public sector also has that unique ability to convene a wide range of stakeholders. So these things can be brought together to really create a more holistic approach to any particular problem. And of course, economic developers and even those economic health folks of us recognize all problems as really opportunities to create economic growth. Now, I think it's important to note here, before I tell you a story of how this really works in Fort Collins, that it's not a necessity that you have a research university in your own community. There's a lot of ways to draw that research aspect of the triple helix into what you have going in your community already. Some examples of this might be lots of communities have small private schools, small private colleges that provide a research function. There are state university extension programs that reach well beyond their hometown into the far reaches of a state to provide that connection. One great example of this is Virginia Tech and some of the work that they did in Blacksburg in terms of creating an off-site satellite campus as well as research facility to really help a part of their state that had fallen behind in the innovation economy. Additionally, looking at federal facilities and federal offices, they often are conducting research or are leading up research that can be helpful. And then even philanthropic entities can sometimes have a research focus. So I bring that up to say that you may feel like, you know, what makes this possible for Fort Collins is the fact that we're blessed with a major university in our community. And that certainly makes it easier to create the triple helix, but I truly believe you can create this kind of system in just about any community. So a good story about how this has happened in our community is the work that Colorado State University is doing with Starbucks. Starbucks is a business that, you know, consumes a lot of commodities, whether that be water, milk products, coffee, and they create a lot of waste streams. And what they've done with Colorado State University is approach them to try to figure out how they can increase their in-store sustainability. Well, as soon as Starbucks approached Colorado State University, because we've created this triple helix in our community, they also reached out to us and the private sector in the form of New Belgium to try to figure out how our community could begin to demonstrate to Starbucks how they can increase their in-store sustainability. And so we took them to New Belgium, which has its own anaerobic digester, which it uses to treat its industrial waste water and then produce methane to create its own energy, as well as we talked with them about how we are looking at creating our own methane production at our own wastewater treatment facility, and how coffee grounds and other waste products from Starbucks might be able to feed into any of those kinds of systems and reduce their own carbon footprint. During those dialogues, we learned that while Starbucks, the way you and I might think of it, is where we get our mochas, you know, the reality is they produce a lot of products and are actually a significant manufacturer. And so they actually have major plants that produce some of their juice products and some of their powdered products that use a lot of water and create a similar kind of wastewater stream to that that's produced by New Belgium. So again, by showing off our community, we were able to help Starbucks learn how to improve their own situation. So now I want to talk about one of the key ingredients and one of the key, I think, differentiators between economic health and economic development, and that is a focus on your local talent. As Jeff said earlier, economic development is about creating jobs. As I said earlier, sort of funnily, It's similar to the duck hunting, right? You shoot at what flies, claim what lands. Well, economic health, in my mind, is really about aligning talent and jobs within your community. Because in our minds, our existing workforce is one of our greatest assets. And continuing to think about how that asset can be deployed is important in terms of creating and sustaining long-term economic vitality for your community. So here in Fort Collins, we're blessed. We have a high educational attainment where half our workforce has a bachelor's degree or better. We're also blessed in having a number of companies like HP, Avago, Intel, AMD, Microsoft, Woodward that attract high-quality talent to our community. And what we find is often after folks are done with their term of employment with those businesses, they've come to fall in love with Fort Collins and want to stay in Fort Collins and actually create a pretty strong workforce and talent pool that can be then deployed in other industries. It's interesting, we're seeing a lot of folks that spent their time at some of these high-tech companies building enterprise software and designing chips now finding their way into the clean energy and water innovation space because software and hardware are essential to these new emerging industries. And that's one way I think that if we step beyond our focus on jobs and start thinking about talent as yet another major asset in our community, akin to quality of place, we can actually begin to see how some of our existing talent can be redeployed. So again, I would encourage you to take a look at your own talent base, understand where they come from, who's attracting them to town. In our case, it's these major technology companies, and that gives us an ability to think about how they could be redeployed in other industries in new ways. And then also continue to think about how that talent and workforce pool is continuing to develop in and of itself. Then I think a final step is looking at your own local educational institutions and trying to align what they are doing in the way of educating the talent and workforce with what the employers really need. And in that regard, you can rely on your workforce development board and other state entities to kind of help understand that. So now I want to talk about a really new space in our community, and I think it's indicative of kind of how a focus on economic health can really create new opportunity areas for your community to create economic growth. And that's this concept of climate economy. For a little while, we thought we had kind of coined a new phrase, and then as we did more research, we figured out the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund had beat us to it, and that they'd been talking about how the economy and the climate can work together or against each other for quite some time. At its most basic, I think what underlies this concept of a climate economy is the idea that we can make investments in a low-carbon future and still have a very vital, if not stronger, economy, both locally and nationally and internationally. And so it's really about trying to figure out how and where the economic activity of moving to a low-carbon future can really come together and align. And so we've been focused in this space now for just a handful of months, really since about the beginning of the year, and have determined that there's really 4 big areas for us to focus. And these areas can begin to look in some ways like more traditional economic development activity, but now you can see how they're being applied to this economic health space. So the first focus area is really on engagement, and that's about understanding the business perspective of climate change and carbon footprinting and how that is influencing their decisions. There is also an emphasis on innovation and trying to figure out how do we fill some of the gaps and create new innovative solutions and technologies. Capital is another major area for this. And then finally, adaptation. And so, you know, I think we are unique here in Fort Collins in that we have a community that appreciates and embraces the concept of climate change and global warming. There may not be that welcome an audience perhaps in some other communities for these concepts. I think it's still important to think about how making a community more efficient and smarter is an opportunity for economic activity and economic growth. And in fact, the 1776 accelerator out of Washington, D.C., recently partnered with the U.S. National Chamber of Commerce, which has come out against the concept of climate change, to actually produce a document that talks about smart cities and the opportunities for innovation and economic growth within that space as a major influencing factor on the economy in the next 25 to 50 years. And so simply thinking about the challenges in a slightly different way still continue to present opportunities for economic growth. So now I'm going to turn it back to Jeff to talk about how economic health shows up in some other aspects of our community.
Thanks, Josh. So I think it's really important for us to try to make the connection between the actual built environment and then also how we connect environmental and social into how we go about land use planning. So it's important for me to point out that land use planning is critically vital in the city of Fort Collins, just like it is in a number of communities. But our city manager, our deputy city manager, our economic health director, all have master's degrees in planning. So there's plenty of land use planners here in Fort Collins, but it's not really just about the land use planning piece. Again, it's about the environmental impacts and about the social impacts. So let me give you one specific case study. There's an area in the city of Fort Collins called the Mountain Vista sub-area, and that is really the largest piece of undeveloped property in the city of Fort Collins. It's been discussed, as you can see on the slide that's before you now, since 1999. And council and the community have had a number of different debates of how they want to see that land developed, and a number of different scenarios were banded about backwards and forwards. And I think the challenge is that they focused way too much just on the actual land use piece itself. In fact, recently, back in 2015, our city council, somewhat in response to the folks in Fort Collins that are, let's just say, not real excited about growth in any way, decided to try to do a rural scenario assessment, which many would call, frankly, downzoning or a very, very low density development scenario. And while we certainly did that work because we were making sure we were responsive to city council, we thought at that time that we really weren't looking at it at the right way. We're only looking at it from the land use piece of it. So we really decided to move forward and use our triple bottom line approach and get really detailed with it. So again, the triple bottom line analysis is looking at an initiative or a project, or in this case, a land use plan, from an environmental, economic, and social analysis, with not a single emphasis on any one of the three, but making sure we're looking at all of those areas. So as you can see from the list, some of the factors and intangibles that we looked at include, under the environmental section, the impact of this potential development on vehicle miles traveled, also on greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution and solid waste. From the economic standpoint, it was really about affordable housing and job creation or job loss, for example, or sales and property tax revenues. So those economic factors were considered as well. But then also, again, a newer space, which I think a lot of communities aren't considering, is the social space. And again, whether it's affordable housing and how close that is within the core of the city and services, whether there's transit that gets folks out to that part of our city or not, what type of recreational amenities were important to serve the burgeoning community in the area, whether there's trail systems or schools and what have you. And then, of course, habitat, too. Would it be important to develop every square inch, or to set aside wildlife corridors and open space and so on? So again, we took a purely land use planning exercise, which we've been going through since 1999, without a lot of broad community support, and really put in our triple bottom line analysis. And what that yielded for us was a brand new land use plan, which we really call, for this area, a living corridor, where it's really using some older land use planning principles that many of us are familiar with, which is cluster development. Cluster development still has some really good applications. So we did a lot of connections with green spaces throughout this sub-area. We preserved a lot of open space. We set aside a lot of areas for public and private spaces. And again, we encouraged cluster development for the residential component. Here's the other thing that's unique, and I'll talk about it in a little more detail with the next slide, is because this is on the edge of our community, we also thought it was really important to set aside some of this land for continual agricultural production. Local food is a very important part of our identity here in Fort Collins, and it's not just actual production farming, but also local farming that people do actually in their backyards with rooftop gardens and so on. But we wanted to create a community, a living corridor where people could live and also enjoy agricultural production right outside of their home. So we were able to do this with achieving the necessary density of residential development with transit and schools and trails, while at the same time maintaining a rural character. We thought it worked out really well. And then more importantly on target for today's discussion, using this type of land use design also helped us for what we call an agri-urban approach. And that is really making sure that our economic health strategy includes the business of agriculture. So you can see what we're trying to do is to integrate agriculture and housing together within a unified development. We're preserving farmland, we're creating small-scale production in underutilized spaces in an area like this, and we're including agricultural urbanism, where you can have a working farm that's actually associated with a neighborhood or a subdivision. There's really low resident involvement, but you could see a CSA development outside someone's home, which is really exciting. So it's an agrarian urbanism approach with having the working farms integrated into the neighborhood, and we think it's really exciting. The other thing that's important to a number of our communities is to make sure that those agricultural applications are organic with low or no pesticide use or herbicide use at all. So the Mountain Vista development now that we foresee in the future, with applying the triple bottom line approach, really will have all of those models mixed in together. And again, I can tell you, if we didn't have the triple bottom line approach by looking at environmental, social, and economic all at the same time, I do not think we would have ended up with the land use plan that we have now. So that's a great case study, and I think it shows you how you have to really consider the built environment as you move forward with this triple bottom line analysis. Now I'll kick it back over to Josh, and I think this is a really fascinating topic of how we're using different tools and tactics and metrics to measure success.
Thanks, Jeff. So hopefully by now you're getting a sense of what economic health means and how it differs from economic development. We've given you some key principles, given you some case studies, helped describe what we see as some of the key ingredients to being successful in this space. So over the course of the next couple of slides, I want to talk about some tools and tactics that actually, again, get this much closer to how does it actually play out. And so one of the key aspects of our focus on economic health is making sure that we understand if we're being successful. As we've said several times already, it's not about jobs and revenue growth for us. It's about economic sustainability. Well, so we've been on a bit of a journey to try to identify some metrics that can help us really understand whether or not we're achieving this concept of economic health. And in our research, we've come across something called the Genuine Progress Indicator. What we really like about the Genuine Progress Indicator, or the GPI, which is being proposed by several countries and states as a replacement for gross domestic product, or in our case, gross municipal product, is that it takes both credits and debits for the other two legs of the stool that we think about in the triple bottom line. So it adds credits and debits for social aspects and environmental aspects in your community. The other thing I think it does is it paints a picture of economic growth that's much more akin to what your average person is feeling day in, day out in their own lives. So the bottom line here, which is purple, is the gross, the Genuine Progress Indicator, for Colorado, whereas the top line, the black line, is the Colorado gross domestic product. And so, as you could see, gross domestic product is just a measure of economic activity, whereas the GPI is really measuring the net impact of economic health initiatives, and it's a more true indicator of what's happening in our community because of those credits and debits for social and economic aspects. And like I said just a little while ago, it also, I think, aligns more with the the day in, day out experience of your average person in the economy. It's showing flatter growth, whereas the GDP or top line is showing much more extensive economic activity and economic growth within the state, and it's inflated. So in essence, it's overinflated in some sense because it doesn't have that net aspect. So this is, again, one way we're trying to make a shift from thinking about just how much economic activity occurs in our community and really trying to focus more on what is the economic health of our community. So another tool and tactic for achieving economic health is to think about the capital that is available in your community, as well as the capital that your community itself invests. So if we think about the city as a platform, which is a concept we've alluded to earlier in the presentation, and I'll say some more about now, then the way that the city uses its capital in purchasing products becomes an important aspect of creating good economic health. So the concept of the city as a platform is, as our mayor says, is sort of akin to the idea that your mobile phone is no longer a mobile phone. Your smartphone is actually a platform upon which a number of things that you do in your daily life occur. Everything from counting the steps and calories that you consume to managing your health, to understanding what the weather is, what's the best way to get home to avoid traffic, those sorts of things. And so what we want to try to do is bring that same concept to bear in the city. How can the city be a place where a number of different activities occur that achieve outcomes that are in line with our value set? They create good economic activity, and they achieve great innovation. And so we've actually been using capital within our community in a number of different ways to try to have that happen. Going back to about 2009, we've had an industry cluster grant program. So you'll remember earlier in the presentation we talked about the importance of being intentional and focusing on industries that align with your community's values as a way to create economic health. This industry cluster grant program is a way for us to use not really coupons, as Jeff suggested earlier, but some of the capital that we are charged to manage from our citizens through tax collection to invest in these. It's a small pool of funds, about $200,000 annually, and it really has an objective of trying to support the ecosystem in which those clusters can be successful and that they can have positive economic outcomes and solve some of our community's technological and challenges in terms of moving forward. Another way that we look at leveraging our community's capital is through public-private partnerships. Again, public-private partnerships are a fairly traditional economic development strategy that we try to apply in a more economic health way. An example or a small story about that is we are in the midst of completing major renovation and redevelopment of our city's what was called the Foothills Mall. That redevelopment has included the kind of triple bottom line analysis that Jeff talked about occurring for Mountain Vista, and as a result, netted a number of activities and changes in the way that that development has occurred. Everything from achieving 75% waste diversion throughout the project, not just demolition, but also the new construction that occurred, to changing practices with the construction vehicles to reduce idling and therefore reduce carbon emissions, and improving the stormwater system on site to create stormwater quality treatment as well as retention. So again, thinking about how you leverage the money that you put into projects that are public and private in nature can be another way of better aligning your economic activities with your community values. And then a space that we're starting to move into that I think gets much more directly into the city as a platform is thinking about how we use our purchasing dollars, the things that we buy, as a way of encouraging local business to develop local solutions that can invest to help to achieve the community's values and goals. So the last tool and tactic that I want to talk about is really around engagement. And this focuses on the fact that this is a journey that we don't do alone. This is a journey that takes a lot of actors in our community. And as you can see on the slide, if we're going to achieve a healthy and resilient economy, we need folks from the Convention and Visitors Bureau, from the Chamber of Commerce, from the business entities, from the educational institutions, to all participate in this creation of a healthy and resilient economy. We even need our residents to have their own role to play. And so it's important for us to keep that in mind, I think, if we want to achieve economic health. So now I'll turn it back over to Jeff and let him finish up our presentation so we can get to Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Josh. We're going to have a full 45 minutes for Q&A, which is great. But I will tell you this, admittedly, that our approach of economic health does take time. It is not a fast, efficient, linear process, because we believe that it's a very thoughtful process. There's a lot of partnership. There's a lot of analysis. Our community does not accept growth just for growth itself. So it takes time. But we think when you're building new development in a community that could last 50 or 100 years, what's another few months to make sure you're getting it absolutely right, to make sure that you have alignment of values and goals within your community, to make sure that the new development in your community not only helps the new business itself, to make sure that they have an adequate return on investment, but again, more importantly, which is the theme of this entire discussion, that the new development actually enhances the existing residents, the existing community itself. So that is our story, and we're sticking to it, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Josh and Jeff. That was excellent. We're leaving right now to hop on a plane to come out to Fort Collins and go bike riding and hiking and drinking some beer. But I guess we'll wait 45 minutes. We do have to answer some questions. We have some questions that have come in during the course of your presentation. And the first question that we received has to do with workforce housing. Can you talk a little bit about the supply of workforce housing, including manufactured homes, and how the city is approaching its housing needs?
Yeah, great question. And with, it's a challenge that a lot of communities all over the United States are facing. Fort Collins is certainly facing that as well. So we do have an affordable housing strategic plan that council asked us to develop. A lot of it was based on trying to make sure that we had an appropriate workforce. So we have plans and strategies in place to make sure that we have additional affordable housing, and we actually have protection zones for our existing mobile home parks to answer that specific question. And then candidly, while the city of Fort Collins is 160,000, we actually do have some what I would call satellite smaller communities adjacent to Fort Collins that have a little bit more affordable land, and some of those areas creates additional workforce housing. And we don't have a problem or a challenge with that, because we have built the infrastructure in place and the transit system in place to make sure that people can get to where they're living in the more rural areas into the city of Fort Collins. We've also been very careful in the most built-up portions of our city to provide robust transit, like our bus rapid transit line. And that's an area we've been focusing on having much higher density, whether they're condominiums or apartments, to take advantage of that robust transit line to grow up there instead of growing out. And I think that's a very important strategy that may be a little bit painful and challenging in some communities, but our community and our city council have realized that having higher density in very strategic, important locations is a much better alternative than having your community grow out into more rural areas. So hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. It did bring up another question, and that has to do with the transit to the other communities. How does that work, and who funds it, and what type of transit is available between Fort Collins and those satellite communities you mentioned?
Mhm. So the city of Fort Collins, we're fortunate that we own our own transit company. It's called Transport, and we are able to extend our lines to adjacent communities. But it's also important to point out that we have partnerships with other places like the city of Boulder and the city of Denver, where we actually have our transit lines merge. Boulder has a different transit system. City of Denver has a different transit system. So does the state of Colorado. But we've been able to have these really robust stations that allow us to go from one transit line to another. So again, having those regional partnerships to make sure there's mobility within and amongst different communities is vitally important. It's clearly much better than allowing more single occupancy vehicles.
Right. Thank you very much for that. Next question from one of the listeners is, can you please give us a breakdown of the demographics in Fort Collins, such as incomes and the racial diversity as well?
Sure, this is Josh. I'll try to do that off the top of my head. I won't have all the numbers right with me. As I said in the presentation, we're highly educated, so half our workforce has a bachelor's degree or better. That's a key demographic. We are generally and predominantly a Caucasian community. I think we have right around 10% representation, more or less, of Hispanic origin, and then some other minority representation in our community as well. So we are a fairly homogeneous in terms of racial community. Income, our average family income is, I think, in the low 70,000s. Again, family being different from household income, which I think is closer to the low 50,000s. I would say one of the characteristics, for good or bad, of Fort Collins is that it is largely homogeneous, fairly well educated, more middle to middle upper income, with a few areas of racial diversity as well as economic and social economic diversity. In fact, it's interesting, the lack of diversity has actually come up recently in conversations around how do we promote and continue to develop ourselves as an innovative community. And that multitude of perspective that comes from a diverse community actually can help to make for better and more pervasive innovation. So we're beginning to have a conversation about how do we ensure we are a community that welcomes diversity when it comes to us, so that we can maybe change that a little bit over time.
Yeah, let me embellish on that a little bit, because in fact, I'm glad that question was asked. We didn't talk too much about it in the presentation. We're really calling this initiative about equity and inclusion, making sure that everybody feels that they have a place in the community and feels comfortable and belongs in the community. We have had challenges, and this is being very candid, where we've had some of our high-tech companies recruit folks from outside the country. Those folks have come to the city of Fort Collins and candidly have not had the cultural representation that they were used to in other major metropolitan areas. And some folks have left, and we're very, very sad about that. So we are very intentional now about having these broader discussions about equity and inclusion all throughout the community. It's not something that's just a city initiative. It's something, again, that we're doing with Triple Bottom Line. It's about city, business, university, and community trying to address it to make sure that everybody feels comfortable in Fort Collins. To put a more economic development spin on it, if people want to recruit folks from all across the spectrums of racial diversity, income levels, and so on, you have to have diversity in your community. It's critical, it's important, and it's something that we're working really hard on. So thank you for that.
Sure, and thank you for that answer. Appreciate the frank approach to the answer. Um, Changing tactics a little bit now, can you expand on what uniquely Fort Collins means to your economic health initiative and how it can be adapted to other cities, and
Sure.
what approach you took for defining it?
Sure. I think for us, it's really attempting to capture, that the X factor. Some might call it the special sauce, whatever metaphor you want to use. It's trying to capture that which makes our community really unique. And I think Jeff hit it when he started with kind of the 4 Bs early on in the presentation. We are a bike, a band, a beer, a beauty, community. And so at its broadest sense, that's what uniquely Fort Collins means to us. And so that industry is really meant in some ways to act, we're trying to be intentional to continue to focus on those things and focus on them from an economic perspective. So that shows up in thinking about and meeting with and discussing with our breweries, changes that we might be making to our water treatment approaches, or challenges that we might be having. We had a major forest fire upriver from us, and that impacted things. So it's trying to be proactive and making sure that we engage with that industry and helping them operate well. The bike community, it's not just about having, platinum level attainment in terms of the bike community, but also we've got 20 different industries in our community, or 20 different businesses right now in our community that are either producing parts or products for bicycles, and it's looking at that as well.
Yeah. And let me add, I think, to answer the second part of the question is every single community, whether it's a major metropolitan area or a very rural area, really should identify what makes them unique. And best case scenario is, what are your unique strengths? Josh talked about Fort Collins, about having this excellent water, which attracts the brewery industry to Fort Collins. In other communities, it could be really inexpensive land. That could be a significant driver. It could be really strong access to transportation networks, whether that's the interstate or a brand new 4-lane highway, or immediate easy access to an airport, whether it's a small regional airport or a major hub, or it could be a vast supply of industrial land that has a tremendous amount of infrastructure already in the ground. It could be a city that is within a state that has a significant number of incentive programs. But each city really has to identify what are the unique strengths. I think too many communities say it's a wonderful place to live, work, shop, and play, right? We've all heard that so many times. I'd like to think that most of our communities can say that, argue it, and they should, and hopefully they're striving for it. But really, what are the unique strengths in your community, and how can you really leverage that to either attract more businesses or to grow from within?
Right.
Okay, great. And as a follow-up to that question, what steps would you recommend a city or a county take to add this to their economic health or comprehensive plan? Is it something that the community defines or the council defines? How would you go about that? Or how would you recommend they go about that?
Yeah, I think it's really, keep in mind that Josh and I are both planners, so we're always going to lean in that direction. But I really think it's either starting with a community-wide strategic plan, a community-wide visioning session, or a community-wide update of your comprehensive plan or land use plan. I would say it's more than anything else having broader discussions at a community-wide basis about quality of life factors, right? Mm-hmm. And it should be really answering the question of what type of jobs do we have in the community? How do we want to live in our community? How often do we want to sit in traffic? Whether we're comfortable being a bedroom community and being able to commute, or we want to have the job creation in town. But I really do think that first step, it's really about the community getting together and talking about its future and about its vision and about the quality of life that it wants. Because it's absolutely not a one-size-fits-all approach, right? A city may want to be very rural. The city may want to have really low densities, or a community may be just the opposite. They may want to grow and grow and grow, but they may want to do it in an upward fashion. But I think it's important to have that broader discussion first to make sure there's a vision, a discussion about values, and goals, and then really applying, I can't stress it enough, that triple bottom line approach to economic health, to make sure that you're looking at the environmental piece of it, the social piece of it, and then the economic piece of it. Because if you stress one area over another, you're really going to be missing a bigger part about the picture and the overall impact on the community. So hopefully that answers it. Maybe Josh has some more to add.
Yeah, maybe I'll give I'll give the kind of tongue-in-cheek a bit of a response to Jeff's great, I think, strategic response, and that is, in some ways, it becomes pretty abundantly clear when you go through those kinds of processes Jeff just talked about into what your community's proud of, right? What it brags about when it's elsewhere, you know? I mean, I find myself when I talk to my colleagues at national conferences, you know, wanting to sort of challenge them to put their beer up against my beer here in Fort Collins. And that's because beer is something that is so unique and is a sort of essential, you know, part of our DNA, if you will. And so I think, too, that that's what comes out of the kinds of planning that Jeff was talking about, is you begin to understand what those sort of unique genetic markers and attributes are in your own community, and you find that they're the things that you've been proud of for a long time already, and that now it's about thinking about them in this concept of the triple bottom line, as well as, you know, in the concept of how do they contribute to our moving forward and achieving, you know, longer term economic vitality, right? So that's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek answer, but I think, again, I wanted to sort of stress that it's not maybe as complicated as it might seem, because most communities, I think, already know what they're proud of, and it's just about really raising that to the forefront and embracing it, because it is also what makes your community unique from the next one over.
Right. Okay. Yep. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, touching on the big picture planning efforts, but then also more succinctly, how does it relate to people who aren't people trained in land use planning? So shifting gears a little bit to some more specific questions, does the city own large-scale solar?
So we own some solar. I wouldn't say large scale. I mean, you know, it's scalable. We do have some smaller neighborhood, if you will, solar projects where where the power is actually generated and then dropped into the grid. But we do have an approach where residents can actually buy a panel and buy a piece of the neighborhood solar project. And they can also specifically decide to work with us and say that they're going to be using all of their energy generated from solar only. Now that generates a higher rate for individual homes, but there are many people in our community that have decided that they want to use a renewable energy source and not rely on electricity. So we, as part of our electric utility, provide that resource. I will tell you, and this is exciting, is that as part of our budget process that we're about to recommend to our city council, is that we're going to be doing some pilot projects related to solar energy battery storage. We do believe that a wave of the future is to do a more distributed energy process where it's not really relying on an individual grid that supplies power throughout the community, but rather we could have larger scale solar generated power development, but it really only works if you can store some of that energy via batteries. Because I think many people know that most of our energy storage is in the morning and then in the early evening, and the best solar production for energy is in the middle of the afternoon. So it's kind of working against one another. But if you can harness all that energy through solar panels, store it through batteries, and then have that energy more readily available during the peak times, it becomes a much more sustainable development. So obviously I'm excited about it, so sorry, but solar is a big part of our community.
No, that was a great answer. Thank you very much. So let's see. We have a lot of great questions coming in. Sorry to jump around, but do you have any processes in place specifically to help implement adaptive reuse for some of the older buildings that may not be currently used?
Yeah, I think this is Josh. We are blessed with a good historic stock of buildings kind of in our central business district, which we call our Old Town area. And so we've got a downtown development authority, which has the ability to provide tax increment financing, which supports that, as well as we have some historic overlays that require a specialized planning process, a review through our Landmark Preservation Commission to kind of help to maintain the look and character of that. So the tools that we have to provide are that tax increment financing through the DDA, as well as we tap into many of the state and national programs like tax credits and so forth. If I'm being honest, outside of Old Town, we don't have a lot of historic property that is ideal candidates for adaptive reuse. So where we see adaptive reuse, it's kind of in a highly focused area in our central business district. We're a community that saw a significant amount of growth post-war, post-World War II, really even post-60s. And so as a result, we have quite a bit of building stock that's either not ideally suited for adaptive reuse or is not that historic in nature in terms of wanting to preserve it as stock. So that's some of what we do in the downtown area. We are working at trying to encourage redevelopment and infill in those areas that have been, as Jeff was alluding to earlier, we have a strategy in our community to try to grow up rather than growing out. We've identified some targeted redevelopment and infill areas in our comprehensive plan where we want to see that happen. Those areas are areas that were more auto-oriented in their original generation of development, and we're trying to encourage them with urban renewal and tax increment financing and other similar tools to move to a higher density use in their next generation of development.
Okay, great.
So hopefully it answers the question.
I think it answers it. I think it covers it. Yeah. You mentioned TIFs in part of your answer to this past question, and we did get a couple of questions about some of the other economic incentives you use. Do you use impact fees, TIFs, which you just said you did, tax abatements, transfer of development rights, impact fees, those kinds of things?
Yep. Yeah, let me give just a quick overview. I'll start by saying the state of Colorado in general is a fairly low incentive state. And Fort Collins has also been a very intentional and judicious, so therefore sort of low user of what Jeff called coupons, or we can talk about as incentives. Again, we try to be strategic with those to really encourage the kind of economic activity that we think contributes to the long-term well-being of our community and aligns with values. So the tools that are in our toolkit are not all that numerous, but also probably familiar to some of our colleagues out there. We use tax rebates as one of our primary tools. We use those in a fairly limited way. We provide property tax rebates because we charge it on business personal property. So we provide a rebate on that for manufacturing equipment investment. So that means if a manufacturer buys, $10 million worth of new manufacturing equipment, we often agree to rebate half of the personal property tax they would pay on that equipment, over usually a 10-year time period. In the state of Colorado, municipalities are fairly low reliance on property tax. So for example, we're about 10% of the total property tax bill a business would experience. So that rebate tends to be fairly modest. So we tend to pair with that a use tax rebate, which is in essence, it's a sales tax that is paid when a manufacturer purchases the same equipment, and since they're tending to buy it from outside of the city limits, they pay use tax rather than sales tax when they import it within the city boundaries and apply it for commercial purposes. And so we will rebate. Our tax rate here for use tax is a little bit complicated. The full use tax rate is 3%. 2.25% of that goes into our general fund. The remaining 3/4 go into a number of dedicated funds. So we only rebate the general piece, the 2.25%. So those are tax rebate programs, and that may be a little more detail than you needed, but we provide that. We provide the tax increment financing that I talked about earlier through public-private partnerships. We've been a community that generally has avoided rebating capital expansion fees. We are a community that believes growth in terms of development needs to pay its own way, and therefore tend to shy away from rebating those. We have, in a few isolated cases, used some of our capital dollars to participate with a project in developing some of their off-site improvement and offsetting some of those costs. And then we've done a number of other creative things, like used new market tax credits to support a business incubator in town, and also leverage a lot of low-income housing tax credits to achieve affordable housing. So it's a pretty traditional array of tools.
And this is Jeff. Let me add a couple of things too that I think are a little bit more unique. And again, I'll call these, as I've referenced before, more city platform type of incentives. And the examples I can think of, we own a fair amount. The city of Fort Collins owns a fair number of buildings and actual properties in our city, and we use that as leverage or opportunities. We had, for example, a very underperforming small municipal golf course located immediately adjacent to our river. It's a piece of property that we didn't think was the best use, again, using pesticides and so on next to our blue ribbon trout stream, so we've been trying to turn it over. And we actually put that piece of property out to see if folks wanted to buy it. It ended up being a corporate headquarters for a major manufacturer. As part of that too, the manufacturer is very sensitive about the entrance corridors into their development, and we understood that. So as part of our deal with them, we agreed to upgrade the roads leading into it, but more importantly, to make them more complete streets with wide and generous sidewalks and benches and bicycle lanes, and also landscaping and planters and lighting. So I think it's a great example of the city as a platform using its right-of-way, not only to fortify an entry corridor for a business, but at the same time creating an environment where it's beautiful entrance corridors for our residents. And even if they're not going to the business, it benefits the neighborhoods in and around it. So I don't want to underestimate the power of some of those platform pieces that all cities hold.
Yeah.
Great. Right. No, that's an excellent point. You talk about leveraging what the city is doing for multiple benefits. And I think that's a good example of that. Just a minute ago, you mentioned that you don't believe, or you believe that development should pay for itself. And we did get a question sort of to that effect from a participant. They wanted to know if you measure your return on investment in infrastructure, such as like road improvements and that sort of thing. Before you make a road improvement, do you do any kind of analysis of what kind of return on investment you may get?
So I think we tend to do that, maybe not at an individual asset level, but at a slightly higher level. I think, thinking about in a sub area, are we getting, return on investment? I think it also, I'll take it back to this concept of, we always think about the triple bottom line in terms of our infrastructure investment. How do we, sometimes it's not about the question of do you invest or not, but it's more about the question of how one invests. As Jeff was saying, really using that infrastructure investment as a platform to achieve, environmental outcomes, and social outcomes as well. At the highest level, that's why we're making the shift to the genuine progress indicator, is to think about at a citywide level the collective investment we're making. Does it contribute to the overall economic health? So I guess if I'm answering the question directly, when we pave a certain section of street, we probably are not looking at an ROI. We're trying to look at it in a broader sense of how it fits into achieving our triple bottom line objectives, and then fulfilling sort of the needs for that portion of our community.
Yeah, and I'll just add that specifically, I think transportation is probably the best example. I think in a lot of communities, and admittedly some communities I've worked for before, it was really about, here comes a major industry, a major employer. Let's do a traffic study and make sure that there's enough turn lane and signal adjustment to accommodate the traffic. Right? To us, that's really just maybe one piece of the major puzzle. It really should be about what other things can we provide to make sure that we're providing a multimodal choice for the new development. And that could be, again, adding sidewalks, adding bicycle lanes. Maybe it's adding a transit lane or a bus stop and making sure that those different opportunities are made available. It also could be about encouraging the business that's relocating to provide expanded hours when people come in and out of the development, or telecommuting. I think all of those things really not only helps the business lower their costs, but in theory could also lower the cost of the infrastructure investment that a city may need to make into the community. It could lower greenhouse gases, create a healthier environment, create a healthier workforce for the business, and also a healthier populace living in Fort Collins or any other community, because they might choose to bike or walk or take transit to their business instead of, again, getting in a single occupancy vehicle. So you got to really take a much broader look at it from our perspective, and not just about what actual infrastructure dollars are being spent. It's really about identifying efficiencies and options on the front end before you decide what's the best way to invest in infrastructure.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We are getting, we have a number of questions on infrastructure, and I think this is a slightly different take on the question, and that is a lot of places throughout the United States are facing big problems with maintaining their existing infrastructure. And how does Fort Collins have that same problem as other communities? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so of course we do. You know, we're a community that's been around since the 1800s, so of course we have aging infrastructure. A couple different approaches that we use. Obviously, we have an enterprise-wide capital improvements plan. You know, that's really job one. You got to know exactly your inventory, and we actually go out 20 years in our capital improvements plan. I guess more on point for today's discussion, if a new development comes in and they're generating the demand to expand the infrastructure, whether it's, you know, sewer, water, roadway, et cetera, and it's aging infrastructure, then of course we're going to ask them to pay their fair share of either changing out or upgrading that infrastructure as well. And then again, this is something that's uniquely Fort Collins. Our residents are very understanding of the cost of maintaining and expanding infrastructure. So they have agreed through ballot measures to tax themselves an extra % in sales tax to make sure that we can make capital improvements. So we are highly strategic and very aware about creating an inventory of needs, about identifying opportunities through business partnership to replace it, but then also identifying additional revenue sources to make sure we can replace that infrastructure. If the question really is about, if you have declining infrastructure, can you do economic health? The answer is, yeah, you got to pay attention to it, because you can talk about, again, live, work, shop, and play, but if you can't get that infrastructure to the business, they're not going to go to your community.
So I think a perfect example, Jeff, to build on that is we have an area of our town just north of Old Town called North College. College is a state and federal highway, Highway 287, runs right through the middle of town, and it's one of our urban renewal areas. And the challenge that this area has always had is managing stormwater. It's had antiquated facilities. As stormwater standards have changed, it's struggled to solve those challenges on fairly fractured, you know, parcel sizes. So what we did is we came in and we actually designed a regional system, right, that allows for a much more efficient and effective way of handling that. We're allow for properties then to buy in as they actually move forward and develop. And that buy-in cost we're finding is significantly lower than what it would have cost for them to build the facility on their site, and they have the added benefit of not having to consume site area providing this particular facility on site. So they get the added benefit of saving in terms of meeting the requirement and having more developable area. And so as a result, that's helping us achieve one of our broader community objectives, right, which is trying to focus our growth up rather than out to support alternative modes of transportation and greater density where it makes most sense. So I think to Jeff's point, when you have antiquated infrastructure or infrastructure demands that change in developed areas of your town, sometimes you need to be creative and come up with ways to sort of solve that in a more regional way, spread the cost, and therefore can achieve both the objective of your higher level of standards, your newer infrastructure, without it necessarily having a negative impact on businesses. And in the example I just brought up, it actually created economic value for the property owners in that area. So much so that we did it on the east side of the street. Now we have all the property owners on the west side of the street clamoring for us to help develop a similar solution because they have the same challenge.
I can see a lot of people wanting to follow up on that because I know stormwater is a big issue everywhere. Let's see. So can you give us a brief description of your staffing for your sustainability services initiative?
Wow, that's a hard question to answer, but I'll take a stab at it. So again, it's a true service area, which is 3 departments that go up into one service area. So the head of that is actually our CSO, or Chief Sustainability Officer. And she's a young mother, by the way, which we're really happy. She just had a baby less than a year ago. So it's wonderful to have that diversity in our community at a young age, at a very high level in our organization. And she oversees, her direct reports are the Economic Health Director, the Environmental Health Director, and the Social Sustainability Director. We have, Josh, help me fill in the blank, how many people in Economic Health?
Including myself, we have 5.
5 in Economic Health. I believe we have close to 30 in environmental health.
Not that many.
Okay, 20 there.
Yeah, 20.
And then 15 in social sustainability.
Yeah.
So that's our overall staff commitment to that service area.
Right, which of course economic health is the smallest but the mightiest of the 3.
That's Josh's opinion.
Great, thank you very much. Well, you did just mention a baby, so that's a little bit of a segue into the next question. One of the participants said they imagine that Fort Collins may be a fairly young community. How are you starting to plan for those who might want to age in place and stay healthy and over the course of their whole lives?
Yeah, so great question, and we actually do have an age-in-place plan in the city of Fort Collins. I think a lot of it, believe it or not, is really revolves around infrastructure. I think people believe that it's more about housing than anything else. We certainly try to provide a number of different housing choices, but I think as we age, our mobility declines, and also our want and need and even ability to use single occupancy vehicles significantly declines. So we're trying to provide more housing that is appropriate and development that is appropriate for seniors, again, in our higher density areas with greater access to trails and to sidewalks, to paratransit, to transit, to bus rapid transit. So yep, it's an important part of our community. We do have a winter climate, but boy, the seniors love to retire here as well.
Yeah.
That's great. We just have time for a couple more questions. You mentioned single occupancy vehicles. We've talked a lot about transit. What are your requirements for parking for dwelling units?
So very controversial, and the answer is, sorry, but it depends, right?
Yeah. And generally, we have parking maximums rather than parking minimums.
Yeah.
In fact, for a long time, we had a transit overlay district that had no parking requirement at all. That was proving to be a little problematic. We've included now some requirement for transit. In those transit overlay districts. I don't know the parking requirement off the top of my head. I know what's being delivered generally within the TOD districts is about 1 space per, I think, 1.5 units, give or take. And then again, like I said, we have maximums in terms of commercial use and industrial use, even outside of our TOD.
Yeah. One thing, again, this gets back to the platform question, and I'll be brief, is that we are building more municipal parking structures in our most dense parts of the city of Fort Collins, and actually we're doing it a lot in partnership.
Yep.
Whether that's with Colorado State University or major employers, or actually a new hotel where, for example, we'll do maybe a 4 or 5 level parking structure. The city will agree to own and operate it, but then we'll have exclusive parking spaces for individual businesses or a hotel. And then, of course, they'll share in the capital cost of construction. Again, those private-public partnerships to have creative solutions for infrastructure such as parking structures are really important. And actually, if communities are worried that that's a big ask of a private developer, it's really not. If they have to have the parking, they're more than willing to pay their fair share.
In fact, most banks won't lend to private developers unless they meet certain market requirements for parking. So, they have requirements to provide parking in many cases. So, partnering with them to get better and more dense parking can be a very easy way to address that issue.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Jeff and Josh. We keep getting more questions in, but I'm afraid that we have reached the end of the webinar time frame. And let's see. So I wanted to thank you both very much for your time and for bringing all of this to our attention. I have a feeling you might get some follow-up questions still directly. Thank you also to everybody who attended the webinar. The complete recording of today's webinar will be posted on smartgrowth.org by the end of next week. When you exit from today's webinar, you will be asked to participate in an evaluation of the webinar. Please take a few minutes to provide feedback so that we can continue to make our webinars an enjoyable and educational experience for you. The Clearinghouse will present other webinars in the near future, and we hope that you will keep an eye on smartgrowth.org and our weekly newsletter for details. Thank you all very much, and we hope you'll join us again next time.